Everybody, my name is Mel Brown and I'm the Community Engagement Librarian Sustainability at Hobsons Bay Libraries. And I just realised I didn't stop sharing my screen, so I'm going to stop doing that as well, so you can actually see who's talking to you. I would like to welcome you to tonight's EnviroCentre event. I would like to begin by acknowledging that depending on where you join me from tonight, we are potentially gathered on the traditional lands of many peoples. From my home, I host you from the lands of the Marinbullock, a clan of the Wurundjeri people, and I would like to pay respects to their elders past, present and future, as well as those of the wider Kulin Nation, whose boundaries cover the Hobsons Bay City Council area, where many of you are likely joining us from tonight, but not excluding all traditional owners whose lands we may be communally standing on this evening. Council acknowledges that long before this area was known as Hobsons Bay, our First Nations people had named its places, hosted ancient ceremonies where learning flourished, where knowledge and resources were exchanged, and where healthy communities and relationships were sustained and adapted to the changing environments. We recognise the unique role that diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from many lands continue to play in the life of our city. We pay homage to that this evening, coming together to learn and to share, to sustain and to adapt. Thank you for joining us. So just a little bit of housekeeping for tonight's event. I will be muting people as you come in, just so we don't have a bit of that background noise. So if you are trying to ask a question and we can't hear you, that might be why. So just pop it in the chat and I'll come over to you and ask you to unmute yourself to ask away. We are recording, so please, if you don't want to be on the recording, please make sure your video is turned off. We will have questions during and after the event, so feel free to pop any questions you have in the chat and we can come through to you at the time. And as I said earlier, if you don't want to come on camera or you don't want to come on microphone but you still have a question to ask, don't let that stop you. Pop it in the chat and just say you'd rather me ask for you and I can do that for you as well. So tonight's event is being brought to you by Hobsons Bay Libraries and the EnviroCentre. Very quick update on what's happening with our libraries. In line with state government roadmap to reopening, there have been some changes to our library service. So all Hobsons Bay Library branches are reopening on Monday the 9th of November, so that's next week. We'll be open Monday to Friday 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. and Saturday 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. There are conditions of entry, and so please jump on our website and have a look what they are. It's just about maximum numbers, how long you can spend in the library, social distancing, wearing a mask, all the kind of stuff that you're probably already fairly familiar with. And all of our return shoots reopened back in September, so they are available. If you don't want to rush out and come back in, understandable. We've extended all loans until the 23rd of November, so that's been automatically done. If you want to extend them after that, give us a call or you can jump into your online account. And our Book a Book home delivery will continue in the short term, and we will be continuing to run our events online in the short term as well. So that's all still happening. But tonight's event is of course why we're all here. Indoor plants have taken a bit of a resurgence over the last probably 5 years, maybe even more. And I know everyone's getting on board, which is fantastic. The more greenery we have in our homes as well as in our gardens is always a good thing. But I don't know about the rest of you, but I often get thwarted by some of the plants that I thought would be really easy to look after and they trick me. So what better way to learn about how we can look after some of these plants than with one of our local businesses. Zoran joins us tonight from Zzz Botanical and Home in Williamstown. So please welcome me in joining Zoran for us tonight. Over to you.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you for the introduction and all that information. Yeah, my name is Zoran. I'm the owner of Zzz Botanical and Home in Williamstown. We're located on Nelson Place, 153 Nelson Place, directly opposite the visitor centre. So as you mentioned, Mel, indoor plants, we call it, getting quite popular at the moment. So just bringing in a bit of nature into the home and adding a bit of greenery to your inside space or to your workspace is often very rewarding, particularly when you see new growth with your indoor plants and beginning to see them thrive. So that becomes very rewarding. So tonight I'll be taking you through like our current sort of top 10 indoor plants, some of the easier to care and hardier care plants. It's always good to choose some of the hardier plants to begin with, particularly if you're new to it. That way you gain a little bit of experience and a little bit of confidence, and then we can continue to add from there. So before we just a couple of key things before we go into the list of plants. A couple of key things when choosing your indoor plants. Include just to sort of like have a look at your home and your space and see what kind of lighting you have. Do you have like your home's quite bright or your home's a little bit on the darker side? So it's always good to have a look at your home and your space to see what type of lighting, because obviously lighting is very important when it comes to the indoor plants. And also another good thing to look at is just in terms of your lifestyle. If you've got a busy lifestyle, then sometimes some plants require a bit more care. So you want to choose some plants that are sort of like a little bit lower maintenance, or if you have a bit of time, as we all have had in recent weeks and months, some plants require a little bit more care, and so you can choose some of those plants that you can spend a bit more time looking after. All right, so I'll go into our sort of like our current top 10 easy care plants. So the first one that I've got is probably not surprisingly, it's called a Zzz Plant. Okay, so this is the Zzz Plant here. So we love this plant. That's one of the reasons why we named the shop Zzz Botanical. It's one of the very hardiest indoor plants to look after, and they're very flexible in terms of like where you can position them in your home. So the Zzz Plant can be positioned in a bright sort of filtered location, or you can also position this in a very low light area. Like if you've got a dark corner somewhere in your home and you're not sure what plant or what type of plant you could put there, the Zzz Plant is a good choice. They're very hardy and they can tolerate very low light as well. There's a sort of a saying when it comes to this plant. They call this plant, they say that it can thrive on neglect. So if you forget the plant is in a dark corner for a week or two, or even a few weeks, it'll still be doing quite well and still looking nice. This plant is native to like Africa, so it's what do you call it? So because of the dry conditions there, it's drought tolerant, so it can go a long period without watering. Some of the reasons why it doesn't need too much watering, you can see the foliage on the plant. It's like a nice evergreen foliage. So it's got beautiful glossy green leaves, and the leaves are quite thick to touch. So they're nice and firm and nice and thick. So they retain a lot of water and a lot of moisture within their leaves, within their foliage, and also their root system. The root system on this plant, it's got like very bulbous sort of roots. So again, it retains a lot of moisture in those bulbous roots. So it can go long periods without watering. So that's a great plant to start off with, the Zzz Plant. The plant grows to about, like 70, 80 centimeters in height, but I have seen some large ones growing outdoors, and they can get to like over a meter tall than that. As the plant grows and matures, it can have a bit more of a drapey sort of appearance, but generally they have a nice sort of upright sort of appearance. So if you're looking for a nice sort of upright, compact sort of plant, the Zzz Plant's a really nice one for it. We've got a couple of varieties of the Zzz Plant to show you tonight, or actually 3 varieties. So this is the really popular variety you see in plant stores and nurseries. Another sort of variety is I've got the Zzz Black here. So Zzz Black has got darker foliage. It's got very dark foliage, and the more light because of the dark foliage on this plant, ideally, it's probably good to position this one in a brighter location, because that will continue to encourage that sort of dark colour on the foliage. Again, you can put it in a lower light area, but to continue to encourage that nice sort of dark leaf, the Zzz black look, ideally you probably want to position that one in a brighter location. But it can, again, tolerate low light. All right, the next plant I've got here is this one's called Zzz Zenzi. So this is more of a sort of a rarer variety of, along with the Zzz black, this is quite rare. So they're not always available. So the Zzz Zenzi is another nice sort of collector rare variety of the Zzz plant. This one, again, it's got nice sort of thick leaves and thick stems. It's more of a sort of nice sort of compact version, and grows a little smaller than the normal Zzz plant. Okay, so that one's called Zzz Zenzi. Okay, so the next plant on our top 10 list is Sansevieria. Okay, so we've got a Sansevieria just here in front. So again, we've got just a few varieties to show you tonight. Yeah, again, so Sansevierias, they're very hardy plants. They come by, they're known by a few different names. They're also called snake plants, and they're also known and called mother-in-law's tongue. So whenever I mention that to some customers, they come into store, I usually get a few little giggles and laughs out of that. But yeah, so known as mother-in-law's tongue, snake plant, or the Sansevieria. So again, they're beautiful plants. They make nice, the larger ones make nice sort of feature plants in a home and can fill up the space beautifully. They're very decorative, and again, very hardy as well. Okay, again, they've got very thick foliage, so again, retains a lot of the water within their foliage, and it's a very low maintenance plant as well. Doesn't require too much watering. So this plant you could probably water every couple of weeks or so at most, over the spring summer period, and then you can probably comfortably go like up to 3 or 4 weeks over the cooler months, over autumn and winter in terms of watering requirements. Okay, so this is one of the varieties that we have in store. It's a popular variety. Another one of our favourites in store is the Sansevieria Moonshine. Okay, so Moonshine's a nice little collector plant. It's got beautiful lighter cut of foliage. Yeah, it's got sort of like that nice sort of look framed with a nice sort of darker trim on the ends. So that's one of our sort of favourite plants in store, and we try to regularly have this one in store and available. Okay, and then another variety is this hybrid variety. It's got a bit of a sort of like a tiger sort of print on there. So yeah, lots of different varieties with Sansevierias. There's some rare Sansevierias like the whale fins. So they come in lots of different varieties, and they're a good plant to sort of collect. They're great air purifying plants, the Sansevierias. So they're very good at air purifying and removing toxins in your home. They're also one of the few plants that produce oxygen at night time. So a lot of people, keep the plant in their bedrooms. They have a few plants in their bedrooms, and also they're a good luck plant, like good luck sort of feng shui sort of plant. Lots of businesses will have Sansevierias. Lots of homes will have some Sansevierias, at the front of their house, trying to sort of like bring like good luck and prosperity as well. Okay, so that's the Sansevieria number 2.
Zoran, just before we go on to number 3, we've got a few questions about the Zzz and the Sansevieria, if you don't mind. So C, I'm not sure what C stands for. You had a question. Did you want to unmute yourself, or would you like me to ask for you? So we've got a member of the on tonight. C is the only initial that I've got. See you there? Okay, I will ask C's question. How fast does the Zzz plant grow? Mine's not changed at all in about a year.
Yeah, but they are relatively slower growing plants. Okay, so the Zzz plant is a relatively slow growing plant compared to, say, for example, a Monstera. Monstera is a good growers, and they shoot off new leaves, quite regularly. However, the Zzz plant is a relatively slow grower. To try to encourage quicker growth in the plant, as I said, the plant's quite flexible where you position it. You can position it in that brighter location, or you can position it in a lower light or darker area. However, the more light that you do give the plant, then the quicker it will grow. So what I recommend is, if it hasn't grown for that period, then if you can reposition the plant, give it a little bit more light. Okay, give it a little bit more light, and also, as I said, the plant can go a while without watering, and obviously you want to be careful not to overwater this plant. But with the warmer weather, you can water a little bit more often. So try to water it maybe every 2 weeks, over spring and summer, and position in a brighter location, and then you'll hopefully see some new growth coming through. And the new growth with the plant's quite really interesting. Like I love this plant, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy this plant is when there is new growth, then what happens, a new stem will shoot out from the pot, okay, and then that stem will come out. It comes out like a spiral, like a chisel type stem, and it comes out all nice and tight and compact. And then once that sort of like stem's grown to a certain height or certain length, and you'll find, with the stems, they tend to be longer than the previous stem. Like this is one of the newer stems, and you can see this is like the tallest stem on that plant. But when it comes out, it's nice and curled up and tight like a chisel, but then it just sort of furls all at the one go, unfurls at the one go. Yeah. So there's a couple of tips. And the other thing, again, being spring and summer, it's a good time to feed your plant. Give it some plant food, give it some fertilizer. So if you begin to feed your plant with some fertilizer, then that will encourage it to grow a little bit quicker as well over spring and summer.
Thank you. Chantal, you had a question about whether there'll be notes on this session. We won't have notes, but I do suggest heading down and visiting Zoran in store, or jumping on his Instagram as well. And I hope your vision and sound is doing all right. It's pretty good from my end. So I hope that was just at the start. Let me know if you're still having issues, but it's pretty good from my end. So I hope that that's better. Sarah, did you have a question? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask away?
Yeah, I just wanted to know whether they were pet friendly. So for small pets like parrots and rabbits, I hear some indoor plants can be poisonous.
Yeah, look, the Zzz plant, it's not a pet-friendly plant. It can be a bit toxic to pets, so it's probably a plant that you want to be a little bit careful with if you have pets around. And just maybe position that plant where your pet won't have easy access to it. I think with most indoor plants, if your pet has a little nibble, has a little bite, generally it shouldn't be too bad, it should be okay. But if they're prone to sort of like chewing up things and having a good go at the plants, then the Zzz plant's one we want to be cautious with. So
thank you.
But we do have we will go through as part of our top 10 list some other plants that are pet friendly. So we'll talk about some of the pet friendly plants there as well. And we've got a good variety of pet friendly plants in store as well. So we always try to have a good variety of those pet-friendly plants, because it's a regular question that customers do ask when they come in.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. The other questions are a bit more general about plants, so we might hold on to them till the end. But if you have questions about specific plants as we're going through, pop them in, and the general ones will come back to at the end. So back over to your number 3.
Thanks, Mel. All right, number 3 on our list is a very popular indoor houseplant. Most of you are probably already familiar with it. It's the Monstera deliciosa. Okay, so this plant's also known as the fruit salad plant. And I think it probably gets that name because the plant actually does produce a fruit. Indoors, it most likely won't produce any fruit, but I have seen this plant outdoors. And it produces sort of like a corn type shaped sort of fruit, about 30 centimeters long. And that fruit is actually edible. You want to be a little bit careful with that fruit because the fruit has to be very ripe before you venture to taste it. Because again, if the fruit's not ripe, then it can be a bit toxic as well. So, but yes, that's where it gets that name. If anyone's interested in the fruit of this plant, there is we've got some guy on YouTube. I think he's based up in Queensland. I've seen a little clip where he shows that fruit in a bit more detail. And actually, I think he's begun to make some Monstera jams, so Monstera fruit jams. So yeah, so if you search Monstera fruit in Queensland, you'll probably come across that little video, and it's quite an interesting little video to watch as well. Okay, so yeah, so the Monstera plant, fruit salad plant, and it's also comes by the name of the Swiss cheese plant. Okay, so there's probably a couple of plants that get mixed up with that Swiss cheese plant. One is the Monstera. The other one is another Monstera plant, Monstera adansonii, which is like a smaller leaf plant. And they get those names, the Swiss cheese plant, from the sort of serrations it has and the fenestrations it has on the leaf. Okay, so on a younger plant, you can see like the leaves, the younger leaves are quite sort of small. There's no sort of serrations on the plant. Okay, but then it sort of like begins to have some serrations that come through, and this is part of it's part of the rewarding of this plant. Like it's always interesting to see when a new leaf grows and how many serrations. And you might start off with one or two, then as the plant matures, you get a few more. So it can have serrations all over the leaf, and then you can get a few little smaller serrations in between as well. So again, it's a very popular indoor house plant. It's relatively low maintenance. The plant doesn't need a lot of light to do well. So, the plant can do well in sort of say, moderate light to nice sort of filtered light. So it doesn't have to be anywhere too close to a window. So if you've got a lower light area, like towards the middle of the room or, a little bit towards the window, then this is a plant you could position there and it will grow well and do well. Yeah, so the Monstera is one of probably the top 3 selling indoor house plants. In terms of watering, probably just give it a nice water like once a week in summer, and you can probably go once every 2 weeks in winter. So yeah, so probably it wants a bit more water than the Zzz Plant, but about once a week or so in summer and once a fortnight in winter. If you miss a watering for a few days, again, it's not a plant that's going to do anything dramatic on you. The foliage might feel a little bit softer and the leaves might droop a little, but once you give it a water, it's going to firm up and spring back to life. So a nice sort of relatively easy plant to look after as well. And as I mentioned, really rewarding in terms of the regular growth that comes through with this plant. So I've got a new leaf here, and you can see the new leaf. It's got that nice sort of lighter colour green on it, nice and shiny and glossy. And you can see that's a relatively new leaf. And then I've got another one tucked away here that's starting to come through as well. So you can see this like come out. Yeah. If you have a look at our Instagram page, Zzz Botanical and Home, we've posted some time-lapse videos on some of the Monstera plants and just how some of the new leaves grow and sort of unfurl. And it's good fun to watch as well. So if you get a chance, have a browse on the page, and you'll see some recent time-lapse videos on our page. So the Monstera, again, there's a few varieties of the Monstera deliciosa. One of the unicorn plants in the plant industry is a variegated Monstera, and there's a few varieties of the variegated Monstera. There's one called the Thai Constellation. The Thai Constellation has got some nice sort of white variegation on the leaf. It's been sort of like recently released and become available in Australia in sort of like recent months of the past 6-12 months. So that's a nice sort of popular variegated plant. They can get a little bit pricey with the variegations. So I think some of the Thai Constellations were initially selling for about $300, around that sort of mark. So that's one variety of the variegated plant. There's also another variety, which is probably one of the unicorn plants in the plant industry, called the Monstera deliciosa Varigata Elbow. Okay, so the elbow, similar to the Thai Constellation, it's got some beautiful white variegation. However, with the elbow, it's a plant that can produce like a full white leaf. So you see this nice sort of green leaf. The elbow can actually produce, if you get a really good quality plant, it can produce a full white leaf, which they call a ghost leaf, or it can produce sort of like, you know, a half green and a half white leaf, sort of like which they call it like a half moon. So yeah, it's they're beautiful plants. They're naturally mutated, so they're quite rare to come across. Yeah, so at the moment it's one of the very sought after sort of indoor house plants. We do have one at the moment. We are growing one at the moment, but again, being variegated, they tend to grow a little bit slower as well. So we hope as that plant grows and matures, we can begin to bring a few sort of small plants and small cuttings into the store over the coming weeks and months. Okay. All right, so I'll move on to number 4. So number 4 on our list is another popular indoor house plant. Again, you may be already familiar with it. It's called the Golden Pothos or Pothos, depending on where you come from. Also commonly known as the Devil's Ivy. All right, so this plant is a beautiful hanging plant or trailing plant. So I've got one over here in the corner. So yeah, so they're beautiful trailing plants, very popular, you know, in the home. Also, lots of businesses, lots of cafes, you know, have these plants in their shops, in their stores, because again, it's very low maintenance, easy to look after. They're great growers. They can trail, you know, very long. As the vine sort of grows, you can begin to sort of like, you know, like pin it on a wall or train it to grow up or cross. So again, so they can be very decorative sort of feature plants as well. Okay, so that's the Golden Pothos. So in terms of lighting requirements, again, it just doesn't need anything too bright. I think if it's in a too bright location, too close to a window, then the plant can dry up a little bit, and you may begin to get some dry leaves, or the leaves start to yellow a little. So I think just like moderate light to sort of like nicely filter light, and the plant should do very well. I also have got another Golden Pothos Devil's Ivy here. This one's set up on a totem. Okay, so this one encourages the plant to sort of climb. Actually, in nature, this plant actually is a climber. Is naturally more of a climber than a trailing plant. So the plant grows sort of like some nice sort of large aerial roots on the vine, and that helps it to cling onto other trees and its environment next to it, and then sort of like begins to sort of like climb in that. So outdoors, they can grow quite large, so they can grow to several meters high, and the foliage can be, you know, like, you know, half a meter big, you know, some of the foliage. So yeah, so you can have them both as a climbing plant on a totem, or you can have them sort of like hanging on a shelf or hanging similar to how we've got it there as a nice sort of trailing plant. Okay. And what you find with the Golden Pothos is generally if the plant's set up to climb, you'll find that the leaves tend to grow a little bit bigger as well. So if you want the leaves to be nice and big, and you know, so it's probably, you know, nice to set up the plant to climb, and then down the track, once the plant's reached a bit of maturity, or you take a cutting from the plant, you can then set it up as a bit of a trailing plant as well. So, but generally the plants, you know, grow bigger leaves if they're set up to climb, as opposed to when they hang and trail.
Perfect timing for this question, Zoran, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We've had a few questions about how to propagate from cuttings. So you just mentioned about that one, and I see you've got a bowl of water over there with a few in there.
So I've got some cuttings over here. All right, so we've already taken a few cuttings from one of our other sort of trailing Golden Pothos. So I'll just take one out. We've got a few different cuttings in here, but this is a rooted cutting as well. Okay. So that's got I got a little Stylus in there as well, which I'll show you that later. Okay, so you can see that one's growing some roots. No, that's not the thing. It's the flowers as well. So I got the wrong plant. I've got a few cuttings in here. Here we go. All right, there we go. All right, you can see that one's growing some nice long sort of roots on that one. And so generally when you take a cutting from a pothos, you want to take the cutting from beneath a node. Okay, and the nodes are usually where the leaf grows out of. So for example, that's a little node there, and you can see the leaf growing out of that node. And you can see on this node, there's another aerial root as well that I was talking about in terms of those aerial roots, sort of like the plant using those aerial roots to hang on to other plants and trees around it. So basically, when you take a cutting, you want to take a cutting beneath the node, but it's always good before you take the cutting. It's always good to leave at least one leaf on the plant, okay, and then you take the cutting from beneath the lower leaf and the lower node. So you've got at least one leaf on the plant. So you take a cutting below that, okay, and then what we've done is we've done some water propagations. So you place that cutting in some water, and the ivies tend to root relatively quickly. So within like a couple of weeks, within 2 to 4 weeks, you'll begin to see some nice roots starting to grow out of that node. And then once the node's grown to say, like a couple inches long, you can begin to repot this if you like. You can leave it in the water propagation for quite a while, and it continues to grow the roots longer. So this one's, probably, well overdue for a potting. So the roots are a few inches long here. But once they go to like say an inch or two, you can begin to, repot that one. You can repot that one in the same plant that you have, and make your plant a little bit fuller, a little bit lusher, with some more vines and stems growing out of that plant. Or you can, pot into a new little pot and create a new plant. Just add to your indoor plant collection, or you can create a little plant that you can give to your friends and family as well. Okay, all right. So that's the Golden Pothos. That's how you sort of like propagate that one. Yes, I'll pop that one back in for now. Okay, and there's just another little trick. When you do propagate the Golden Pothos or you propagate other plants, for I'm not sure of the scientific reason, but it's always good to have a pothos cutting, a devil's ivy cutting, in your propagation vase. Even if you propagate other plants, I think there's some sort of reaction in there that encourages the rooting to be a little bit quicker. So it's always good to have a little devil's ivy Golden Pothos cutting mixed in, similar to how we've got with some of our other cuttings, and then all your cuttings tend to grow a little bit quicker and rooting a little bit quicker as well. Okay.
Just on cutting zone, while you're still there, Chantal had a question. Chantal, did you want to jump on and ask about your cuttings question? That's all right. She was asking, how can you tell which plants can be grown from a cutting?
Yeah, so like a lot of plants can be grown from cuttings. Generally, like your viney plants can be grown from cuttings, or plants with stems that have got sort of like nodes and aerial roots. So they're plants that you can usually grow from cuttings. Then some plants, are easy to propagate, like Hoyas, for example. Hoyas are a nice plant to propagate because, generally with a Hoya, they're not too fussy where you cut the Hoya. Like because when you cut the Hoya like on the stem, then it can generally root from that sort of stem. So because Hoyas tend to grow lots of little area roots all along their vine. So they're another plant you can sort of cut and propagate easily. Other plants, for example, I'll show you. I'll come back to this one, but this is another one I'll show you. This is Achillea. Okay, so the best way to propagate Achillea is the plant basically propagates on its own. You can see this is a nice sort of feature Achillea, but then in amongst the soil, there's a few little pups or little babies starting to grow. So that's shooting off for the root system. So it's creating a few new little plants, little pups on its own. So with those ones, so when you repot this plant, or you can just like take a snip towards the bottom of that little pup, the root of that pup, and then separate that out. And then again, you can put that in some water propagation, and then that will begin to root, and you can create another little plant. So this is another way of propagating. The plant basically creates its own propagation, creates its own little pups, So this is one variety. Another variety that does that is the spider plant, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Okay. Okay, and then I'll show you another plant. For example, Calatheas. Okay, so I've got a nice sort of Calathea here. The best way to propagate these plants is probably when you repot it and the plant becomes nice and full and lush, probably just to separate a few of the stems and the roots when you repot it. So once you separate a few of those sort of stems and roots, you generally just pull it away. It's okay if you damage a little bit of the root system. The plants are pretty tough, so it's not going to damage the overall plant. But the best way to propagate, like a Calathea, for example, is when you repot and you just separate some of the stems and some of the roots out, and then you create a second plant or a third plant. Yeah. Okay. Is that okay?
Those were all the questions on specific, so let's keep going and we'll come back to the general questions at the end.
All right, okay. So before we move on from the devil's ivy, so the ivy is a very popular plant, but again, it comes in a few different varieties. You may be familiar with a variety called the Marble Queen. So the Marble Queen's got some nice sort of variegation, some sort of white and yellow sort of variegation on that. So that's a nice sort of plant in that Pothos family. Another one's called Snow Queen. Again, so that's got some different sort of variegation as well. And there's another plant called the Satin Pothos. So and that's got sort of like a really nice sort of satin, sheeny sort of foliage on the leaves. So they're all other sort of plants in that group, in that Pothos ivy family, that are also very popular indoor house plants. And again, we try to get those plants in on a regular basis as well. Okay. So watering on this plant, as I mentioned, probably about once a week. Give it a good water. Normally, I sort of like wait and I see the leaves look a little bit droopy or the leaves are a little bit softer than normal. Then I know it's time for water. And then once I give it a water, then basically overnight or after a few hours, it firms up and springs back to life. So yeah, so it's probably good just to wait until the leaves feel a little dry, and then you can give it a really nice water. Okay, but generally about once a week over spring and summer. Okay, so moving on to number 5. Okay, so number 5 in our top 10 is a variety called Ripsalis. So Ripsalis, they're also known as mistletoe cactus. They're in that cactus family. Again, they're very hardy plants. So I've got one just here on that sort of tall standing pot. So that's one variety of the Ripsalis. They're in that cactus family, and being in that cactus family, they're quite hardy, and they require low watering. They don't require too much watering as well. So I've got a nice sort of, and the Ripsalis come in lots of different varieties, lots of different foliage patterns. They're beautiful long trailing plants as well. If you want to create that indoor jungle look and indoor jungle feel, Ripsalis are great plants to do that. Okay, and this is another variety here. So you can see it comes in lots of different foliage patterns, like a wide leaf compared to like a thin sort of long drapey sort of leaf there as well. Okay, yeah, and then I've got another variety here as well. You can see this variety's got some really nice colouring on the top. So with this plant, it generally likes to be located in a brighter location. So if you've got a bright spot at home near a window or towards a window, the plant will thrive, it will do well. But again, they can tolerate, moderate light. So moderate to bright light, this plant should do really well. But with this kind of colouring on the plant, the brighter location you can give it will continue to encourage that sort of nice variegation, nice colour on this plant. So if it's in moderate light, it probably won't generate as much colour, for example. So most plants with a bit of colouring, that kind of red tinge, or pink plants are quite popular at the moment as well. So any of those kind of variegated plants with a bit of colour generally tend to like and prefer a brighter location. Okay. Again, so with the Ripsalis watering, you can go, you can probably go a couple of weeks even some in summer. Unless if it's in a very bright location, then probably about once a week give it a good water. But if you miss the water in 1 week, again they're very hardy. They're not going to do anything. So you know they're okay to stop miss a watering, and you give it a water, they're still doing well and still thriving. Okay. So again, so I've got some really nice Ripsalis, and I've got a few on the shelf over here as well. I can show you. Again, nice little Ripsalis there, and then I've got this little Ripsalis. So this one's quite unique. It's got like a bit of a short haircut kind of look, but then you've got a few strands that sort of like pop up and doing their own thing. Okay. Yeah, so they're a really nice plant, very hardy, come in lots of different styles. Some more upright, others trail, and then others do both. All right, so I'll move on to the next plant. So the next plant, again, is a very popular indoor house plant, the peace lily. I think I've got one just over here in the front. So the peace lily is a nice sort of wider leaf, evergreen type plant. It's got beautiful green foliage, and peace lilies are very good air purifying plants as well. They're very popular. You've probably come across one in the past. And often the peace lily is, lots of people's, first plant or first introduction to indoor plants. And the peace lily, does produce a nice sort of white flower. You can see this one's sort of like beginning to reflower at the moment. So it's got a nice sort of white flower, which will last, once it flowers, that lasts several weeks. And then they begin to sort of dry off a little bit after that. Okay, but they tend to reflower on a regular basis. Often, one of the questions I've received in the past is that their peace lily is not flowering. So, the plant can tolerate low light, or the plant can tolerate low light. So it's a good low light plant or moderate light plant. But if your peace lily is not flowering, you want it to reflower, then again I would probably position it in a little bit brighter location. And then again, I would probably begin to give it some plant food and fertilizer over spring and summer period to just give it a little boost, to keep along, give it a little bit more energy, and then it should hopefully reflower as part of that as well. Watering, the beauty of the peace lily when it comes to watering, it's very obvious when the peace lily needs water. The peace lilies, have been known to be, they can be a bit dramatic. So when it does need water, it might look beautiful one day, and then the following day, if you haven't watered it on time, the leaves will just begin to droop and look very sad and saggy, and so they can be very dramatic in that way. However, not to worry, don't be too concerned, because once you give it a good water, then those leaves within a few hours will spring back up as well. So the peace lily is a great plant in terms of, it actually tells you when it needs water. It gives you that strong reminder when it does need watering. But once you've given it a nice water, then it looks just as beautiful as when you first watered. So okay. So I tend to wait until I notice the leaves are a little bit droopy before I water it. That way you're confident that you won't be overwatering this plant. Okay, so this plant probably requires a little bit more water, and you'll probably water this plant at least once a week over that spring-summer period.
Zoran, just before we move on to the next plant, Catherine had a question about the peace lilies. She's got one with browning of the leaves.
Okay, browning the leaves. So browning of the leaves, it just depends on where the leaves are browning. So if the leaves brown, generally with the peace lily and other sort of indoor plants, if the leaves begin to brown on the edge of the plant, then that could be a sign of underwatering, or it could be a sign of a little bit too much light as well. It's getting a little bit too bright. So then you start seeing a little bit of yellowing, a little bit of browning on the edges. Okay. However, if the plant is browning in the middle of the leaves, okay, start to spot in the middle of the leaves, then that's probably an indicator that the plant's being overwatered. Okay, so yeah, so if the plant's drying on the edges, I'd probably pull it back. A little bit from the light, and maybe give it a little bit more water. But if it's browning in the middle, then if it's browning in the middle, then it's a sign of possible overwatering. The other thing with peace lilies, sometimes they can attract certain little pests. Okay, like for example, mealy bugs or little spider mites. So the plant could be affected by some pests, and therefore draining the energy of the plant, and therefore you're seeing some browning and some yellowing of the plant. So the best way, a good way to particularly with these large foliage sort of plants, because they can attract a bit of dust, and once they attract a bit of dust, they can attract some pests, is to sort of like give them a regular wipe down. You can wipe them down with a bit of just like a paper tissue or and a bit of water, or you could use some what we have in store is like some neem oil. So this is some organic neem oil. Neem oil acts like a natural sort of pest repellent, so it gives your plant and your leaves a good wipe and a good sort of shine, and wipes off all the dust. But the neem also acts like a natural sort of pest repellent. So so that will, if you wipe down your plant with the neem oil, once that week, and then probably give it a second treatment the following week. Generally, with those couple of treatments, the plant should start doing better. Okay. One thing to remember is when you do treat your plants with a bit of neem oil and you wipe down the foliage, the neem oil makes the foliage and the plant a little bit susceptible to bright light. It becomes a bit more sensitive. So once you treat it and wipe it down with a bit of neem oil, probably good to position the plant in like a lower light area or a shady area just for a day or two, and then reposition it in its normal sort of place after that. Okay, so there are a few sort of indicators as to what may be happening there with that browning of the leaf. Okay, so I'll continue on. So our next plant on the list, we had a quick look at it earlier, was Achillea, also commonly known as the Chinese money plant. So this is a beautiful sort of foliage plant. It's got those beautiful round sort of shaped leaves. It's the name of the Chinese money plant comes from the old sort of traditional Chinese gold coins. So it's got that sort of Chinese gold coin sort of look in terms of where it gets its name from as well. So this plant, relatively easy to look after, but the plant generally does like sort of like nice sort of moderate to bright filtered light. So position this plant like towards a window. If you've got like a spot at home where it gets a nice sort of filtered bright morning light, then the plant would really enjoy that kind of location. Okay. So that's the plant there. And the more light that you give it, then the plant will sort of like the leaves tend to grow a bit bigger as well. So a good sign that the plant's in the right spot and doing well is the plants tend to get a little bit bigger and larger and rounder over time, and growing nice and sort of tall as well. With this plant, it does like to lean towards the light. Okay, it does like to lean towards the light. I'll show you another one that we have in store at the moment. So I've got this one here. You can see that one's got quite a unique sort of stem on that plant. You can see that over time that one's like leaned towards the light and hasn't been rotated that regularly. So it's developed this unique sort of shape on the stem. So if you like that look, then you could leave your Achillea just to continue to lean towards the light. It might develop a similar sort of stem pattern. But if you like that nice, well-rounded sort of shape, it's good to rotate this plant on a regular basis. So 1 week, after you've given it a water, just sort of like turn it around away from the light, and then that plant will sort of like generally, begin to seek out and search for that light and sort of rebalance and grow a bit more evenly. Okay. You can see this one's got a couple little babies, little pups growing as well. Okay. And we've got some smaller ones in store as well. Okay, so we've got a few different sort of sizes that we have in store. And again, you can see that one is like, you look at that side profile, again, it's leaning a little bit towards the light there. So it's a nice one just to rotate, and that will, just even out a bit as well. Okay. In terms of watering, I give it. This plant would probably want to water. If you've got it in that nice sort of bright filtered location, it probably wants to water about once a week. So once the soil feels a little dry, that top sort of inch or so of the soil feels dry, then it's time to give it a nice water. When you water it, a lot of the nursery pots have got like a nice drainage in their little plastic pots. So give it a nice water, let the water drain out, and then I'd sort of like leave it just to dry out again, another thing you could do is, what we call a moisture meter. If you've got a few plants at home, it's time to get a nice little collection. And if you're not too sure, sometimes the plant might feel a little bit dry on top, but then, still there might be a little bit of moisture in the middle or towards the bottom of the plant. You can use like a little moisture meter. You pop that in there, and then that'll indicate like how dry or how moist the plant is. So once the plant's sort of like towards that red indicator, then that's a good sign that it's time for a bit of water as well. Okay, but if you haven't got a moisture meter, just a good way to tell is, once you water the plant, it's nice and heavy, it's nice, nice and moist. But then, a week later, you pick up the plant, you pick it up outside your cover pot. If the plant's feeling, much lighter and the topsoil's nice and dry, then you're confident that it's time for a water. Okay. All right, so that's the Achillea, the Chinese money plant. Again, a very rewarding plant because it does produce those pups and those babies on a regular basis. It's also known as the friendship plant for that very reason, because they're quite easy to propagate, quite easy to separate, and you can gift those little new plants to your friends and family members as well. All right, no questions there?
No questions on that one, so you can continue on.
All right, we'll continue on. So the next plant on our list, number 8, is the spider plant. Okay, so I've got a couple of varieties of the spider plant. So I've got, so this is sort of like the regular sort of spider plant. Okay, again, they're great indoor house plant. They're great air purifiers. They're pretty easy to look after. The spider plant will generally probably prefer a bit of a brighter location. So if you've got a nice little spot near or towards a window, gets nice bright filtered light indoors, it'll be nice and happy in there as well. Nice bright filtered light indoors. And the spider plant, again, very rewarding in terms of, you can see it shoots off some of these sort of standards, begin to shoot off a little pup there. So the spider plant will shoot off little babies and little pups, and you can leave those sort of plants on there. I'll show you another one that's got a few pups on there. Okay, so I've got this one here. This one's a curly spider plant variety. So it's a bit of a collector variety of the spider plant, and you can see this one's growing happily and looks pretty cool with that little face pot. It looks like it's, what do you call it, needs to be booked in for a haircut soon. But yeah, you can see it's growing lots of little babies on the side, nice little vine there, lots of little babies. And then these are pretty easy to propagate as well. So you can just, cut off a couple of those little babies towards the root. And they're pretty easy to propagate. You can plant those little pups straight into the soil or straight into a new pot. And, it's got a high chance of rooting and propagating, or you can also just pop that in some water and then just begin to watch some roots grow as well. So, and the roots grow quite quickly. So within a couple of weeks, with some water propagation, that will begin to root, and you can create, a few new plants out of that as well. Okay, so that's the curly spider plant variety. It's called Bonnie. So this one's called Bonnie, the curly spider plant. And yes, it's growing nicely, nice and happy. And they can become nice big feature plants. I've got a larger one that I'll quickly show you. Okay, so I've got a nice little larger variety of the curly spider plants. So you can see they grow nicely, and you can see this one's got a lot of little pups beginning to grow. So it's doing well. It's nice and happy. I've got a position towards the front of the shop where it gets lots of light. And being during spring and summer, they shoot off lots of little vines and lots of little pups. So again, very rewarding sort of plant to have. Great air purifiers. Easy to look after, and probably just give it a good water once a week over the spring summer period, and it should be nice and happy.
Zoran, we've got a question about the spider plant. Rachel asks, how long does it take for the spider plant to shoot off pups? I've got 3 very happy and healthy plants that have no signs of pups. Had them for over 12 months.
Yeah, like you can see, like this plant here is not that mature. This plant's probably like 12 months to 2 years old. So this is probably 1 to 2 years old. This plant, so it's not that mature. And you can see it's growing lots of pups. So, so it's growing lots of pups. So it doesn't have to be too mature to begin to grow pups. Again, if you have a spider plant and it's not growing any pups, then similar to what I mentioned previously, is a good thing there is to maybe again just have a look at where you've got the plant positioned. Reposition maybe in a spot that's got a little bit more light, just to give a little bit more light. And once it's got more light, then it'll probably need a little bit more watering over spring and summer as well. So you give it a bit more light, give it a bit more water. Again, you can fertilize the plant, give it some indoor plant food, and that should give that extra boost and that extra energy to begin to sort of produce some little babies and little pups. Okay. All right, and our next plant on the list, number 9, is one of our favourite plants, called the chain of hearts. Okay, so I've got a couple of varieties just here on our front desk. Okay, so they're beautiful plants. They're actually succulents. So a lot of people are surprised when I do mention the plant is a succulent, but it's in that succulent variety. They've got really nice sort of heart-shaped leaves, and they're beautiful long sort of trailing plants as well. Okay, being a succulent, this plant would prefer like a brighter, warmer location indoors in your home. It's also a plant you can probably keep outdoors in like a covered sort of pergola area. Really enjoy those sort of conditions as well. I'd be careful to put it outdoors in direct sun, or leave it out in the middle of winter with Melbourne sort of cold weather. It may begin to struggle in those kind of conditions, but indoors, near a window where it gets some bright, warm location, they should do really well. They're good growers, particularly this time of year. So the plant can put on like half a metre or a metre in length just over the spring-summer period in 1 year. And again, they're another plant that's great to propagate. So once it gets a bit too long, this one's getting a little bit long, start to hit the floor in our store. So we can sort of give that a bit of a trim. Again, you'd give it a bit of a trim beneath one of those leaves, beneath one of those nodes, and then it will propagate and begin to root. Another good spot, another indicator, it grows these sort of seeds sometimes on the vine. Okay, so you can see that nice sort of seed there. Okay, so that's a sign of how mature this plant is. So sometimes it grows seeds on the vine, the actual vine, or it's got lots of seeds within the pot and within the soil. Okay, and that's where they tend to shoot off their little vines and leaves. So this is a nice mature sort of mother plant, as they call it. There's another one there. There's another one there. So again, when you propagate this, if you cut the leaf beneath one of those sort of seeds, and then popped it in some water or directly into the soil, it should begin to sort of root and grow from there. Okay, so this is the chain of hearts. Very hardy plants, but being a succulent, it would probably prefer that brighter location. Having said that, I've got this on my front desk in the store, and the desk is towards the back of the shop, so it's a few metres away from the windows and from the light, and we've had it here for quite a while, so it's still very hardy, still doing well, still enjoying it, but for it to grow a little bit quicker, you want to give it a brighter location. In terms of watering, as I said, being a succulent, it won't want to, when you do water it, give it a good water, because particularly if they're nice, mature and long plants, they'll want a really good water. Let the water completely drain through and drain out of the pot, so it can feed all the way down to the bottom stems and all to the bottom leaves. That way it makes the leaves nice and firm and plump. Okay, the leaves can be nice and firm and plump. And if the leaves do feel a little bit thin and soft, then that's a good indicator the plant does need good water. Okay, but yeah, let the plant dry out, keep it on the drier side. But when you do give it water, give it a nice water, and then let the plant dry out nicely before it next watering. Okay, this plant here next to it is the variegated chain of hearts. So it's another popular and sought after plant. It's a rarer variety of the green chain of hearts. And this one's got beautiful variegation, the white variegation. It's got some nice pink leaves as well. And again, the more light you give this plant, then the increased variegation, that nice white and pink color comes through much stronger the more light you can give the plant. Okay, yeah, and it's a really popular plant that we have in store on a regular basis, but they are a little bit more difficult to source, and they do grow a little bit slower than the normal green variety. So they're a beautiful, nice sort of sought after rare variety of the chain of hearts.
No questions on that one, so we're good to keep going.
Okay, so the last one on our top left 10 list is a very interesting plant. So these ones are called air plants, or the botanical name is the Tilansia. Okay, so these ones are air plants, and again, they come in lots of different sort of varieties, lots of different colours and shapes. They call them air plants because they're actually just happy to live on their own. They don't need any soil. They don't need to be potted into any soil. Yeah, you can just position them on like little, I've got a little one on a little face vase here. You can just pop them on there, like different vases or vessels, or little baskets or trays. You can, just position them sort of anywhere, and they're quite decorative. And again, they come in lots of different sort of foliage patterns as well. Yeah, and I've got some here with some nice sort of colouring. Okay, so I've got a couple of nice ones there, and they've got some nice sort of pink colouring on the tip as well. Okay, again, so the Tilansias, particularly the ones with the colouring like this, they would generally prefer, a brighter location, nearer towards a window. But even if we just have moderate light, then the plants will still do quite well because they're relatively hardy. Okay, and they still need watering. They still require a bit of watering as well. So with these air plants, you can give them a bit of a spray mist. You can use, all right, I've got like a little spray bottle. Okay, just like a little mister bottle. You can use something like that. Give your plants like a light mist. And you probably give them a bit of a mist or water once a week in spring and summer, and then you can go again probably a couple of weeks or so, over the cooler months. So you can give it a bit of spray, or even you can just pop it, dunk it in a bit of water, wet the foliage, or just sort of run it gently under the tap, wet the foliage, and the plants will be nice and happy. Okay. All right. Again, they come in lots of different styles. They're actually flowering plants as well. Okay, so we've got some plants featured on some crystals. So we've got some nice sort of featured crystals with some air plants. Then also we've got a nice variety of smaller and medium-sized crystals with air plants as well. So they're very decorative. They're interesting. It's nice to sort of like mix it up a little bit, on your shelf or in your home. Okay, yeah. So the Tilansias, yeah, as I said, they're flowering sort of plants. We've had some previously, but we had some previously that were actually flowering. They had a nice sort of pink flower coming through, but they come with lots of different flowers. Some have yellow flowers, some have pink, some have like a purple sort of flower. So there's a whole variety of different sort of flowering type Tilansias air plants. All right.
Okay. We've got some general questions, Zoran. Do you reckon we can go through some of them now?
Yes, yep, that sounds good.
Excellent. Now, Emma, you had a question about decorative pots. Did you want to jump on and ask your question?
Yeah. You know when you buy your plants in the little plastic pots, do you put those pots inside a decorative pot, or can you just plant them into a decorative pot, like with just with soil?
Yeah, that's a good question, Emma. So in terms of the pots and the cover pots, or whether you pop the plant directly into a decorative pot, one of the important things and key things to look out for with those decorative and cover pots is to look out for whether that pot has drainage. Okay, often you'll see some plants that are potted into a cover pot or decorative pot. And that pot hasn't got any hole or drainage for, once you water the plant, for that water to drain out, okay? And generally that's one of the leading causes of plants not doing well and potentially losing plants. So, because if you have one of those decorative pots that hasn't got drainage, what tends to happen is you water it, the water doesn't drain out, it tends to pool at the bottom of the pot, the bottom of the soil, and then that's when you may begin to get a bit of root rot. And once the plant's roots become affected, then the plant will not to do well. It will start not doing well, and you potentially run the risk of losing that plant. So very important that when you do look for a decorative cover pot, that your pots do have draining holes. Okay. So one of the things that we stock in store, we're always mindful of our pots, that we like to stock a lot of pots that have got lots of drainage to the holes. Okay, and then we always advise our customers, that the pot does have the drainage, it has got a hole. So you can see that one there. Okay, that one there's got a little plastic plug in there at the moment. Okay, but it's got a bit of drainage. Okay, so what you could do, like for example, if you have this sort of pilea plant, okay, you could just, like when you purchase the plant, you can just put it into like that little covered decorative pot and just like let it sit there, okay, and that'll be quite nice and happy. But down the track, as the plant grows, settles into its new environment, gets used to the lighting in your home, and it's growing nicely, nice and happy, then you could look to repot it in something like this, like a little cover pot with a draining hole. You can pop that plant directly into that pot. And the plant will still continue to do well with that drainage. Okay, so when you water your plant, just you take it like over your sink somewhere, or you take it outside, give it a good water, let the water drain out from that draining hole. Once it stops draining, just let it sit for a few minutes, and then just pop back and reposition into its normal sort of spot. Okay. So ideally, when you're looking for those cover pots and decorative pots, look for drainage, one with drainage. If you do like a particular pot and it hasn't got a draining hole, that's okay. But just be aware and be mindful that you want to be cautious when you do water the plant, that you're not over watering it. So when you do water it, make sure you don't water it too much. Give it a little bit of water, and then make sure the plant's the soil nice and dry before you give it its next water. So as long as you sort of like you're mindful of that, then that should be okay as well. But the best thing is to get a nice sort of cover pot with drainage hole, and then you're confident that your plant will continue to do well.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Michelle had a question which kind of leads on from that. Michelle, you've got two questions. Did you want to jump on? Michelle, are you still there? That's all right. Also, Michelle's first question was any tips on how to tell if you're underwatering or overwatering, as the signs are sometimes the same? And then also, do you need to upsize your decorative pots as your plants grow, and how often?
Okay. So signs of like underwatering your plants. Obviously, look, when you check your plant, a good thing is just to feel that top inch or so of soil. If that soil feels nice and dry, so that's a good indicator that needs water. Again, if the pot feels very light, much lighter than it normally feels after a water, then that's another good sign that your plant needs a good water. And often, you know, you can, like, it's good to regularly feel your foliage. You know, like that way you get used to, you know, like once the plant's watered and grown well and it's nice and happy, you can feel the foliage, you can feel like how firm and how thick it is. You know, and then if it feels a little bit different, if it feels if the plant looks like it's drooping a little bit, or the foliage feels much softer than normal, so there's some indicators that, you know, it's time for water as well. Okay, overwatering your plant, similar to how we talked about when we talk about the peace lily. Sometimes if you overwater your plants, then you might get some yellowing and browning on your leaves. You might begin to lose some foliage. Okay, some leaves might just sort of drop off for no reason. Okay, they might just sort of like droop and just, you know, like as you pick up the plant, it drops a couple of leaves. Yeah, so there's some signs that in terms of overwatering. You know, if you feel the soil as well, if it's too wet, too moist, sometimes if you put something directly into like a ceramic pot, the plants in ceramic pots will take a little bit longer to dry out. So before the plant gets used to it, you know, you might see some signs of the plant not doing well, losing some leaves, being droopy. Yeah, so there's some signs of overwatering. Another sign of overwatering is if you notice some more of those little, like those little insects, the little gnats that fly around your plants. So sometimes if you notice an increase in those around your indoor plants, because they thrive on wet soil, they tend to lay some eggs in the soil when it's wet and when it's moist. So, you know, if your plants are overwatered and moist for too long, too often, then you might get an increase of that little fruit flies and little gnats. So that's another slight indicator that you want to be cautious about not overwatering your plants.
Thank you. Karen, you've got a couple of questions. Did you want to come on and ask them, or would you like me to ask for you?
No, I'm happy to come on. How do you get rid of the gnats to start with once you've actually got them into your pots or the soil? That's the first question.
Yeah, a good way to get rid of your gnats is just to do the opposite and let your soil dry out a little bit longer. You know, so if you notice there's a bit of an increase there, maybe for like a week or two, you know, like just let your plants dry out a little bit longer, and then, you know, those gnats and the little eggs that they lay, sometimes they don't last for too long. They only last for like a week or two at most. So if you leave your plant dry out a little longer than normal, obviously mindful that it doesn't dry out too much because you don't want the impact on your plant. But if you let the soil dry out a little bit longer than usual, then that will begin to control and help to reduce those little gnats, because it'll kill off all any eggs that are laid in the soil, and therefore there won't be as much reproduced. You also can get, I'll just see if I can show you. You also can get sort of like some fluorescent sort of sheets. Okay, I've got one here. So this is like a little fluorescent sheet. It's like a sticky sheet. Okay, so you peel off one of the sides, and it's a sticky surface. It's a bright yellow sort of colour. And a lot of those insects are attracted to that colour. So if you position like one of these, for example, near where you have some of your indoor plants, okay, then they will be attracted to that. They'll fly around. They'll land on there. They'll get stuck, and then they'll die, and they'll pass away. They'll get reduced there. Okay, so these work really well. Okay, so I think if you combine, you know, like letting your plant soil dry out a little bit longer, combined with, you know, like a little fluorescent sticky sheet like this, positioned near some of your indoor plants, then you'll see a big reduction in some of those little insects flying around. So, okay, yeah, and we've got a few of these in store at the moment. Yeah, they're relatively cheap, and, you know, often we just throw them into some plant purchases as well. So,
Thanks, that's a great help. I'm keen to know what sort of fertilizer you use for your pots. Do you actually use liquid fertilizer or pellets? And also I'm keen to know what sort of soil you use, and in your soil, do you use perlite?
Yes, depending on what type of plant. Okay, so in terms of like fertilizer and plant food, we do use two types of plant food. Okay, so we've got the plant runner liquid fertilizer. Okay, so that's a good option. It depends what you prefer. A lot of people prefer the liquid fertilizer. Other people prefer the powder, like that volcanic sort of rock sort of form. So we do stock both varieties. I think we're running low a little bit in the volcanic rock powder form at the moment. But we do have the plant runner liquid fertilizer in at the moment. And that's an organic sort of fertilizer. It's got a special formula for indoor plant food. So it's a nice, well-rounded organic fertilizer, specialising in indoor plants. Okay, yeah. All right. All right. So so we've got one from Plant Runner at the moment, and we've got another one from Moon Ash Organics. They've got the volcanic powder form. Again, that's a nice plant food. And they're both, good reputable companies, and we use them, in store, and I use them regularly at home, and plants are doing nice and well, and they're happy with that fertilizer. Okay, and with fertilizing your plants, like spring and summer is a good time to begin to fertilize your plants. So like right now is a good time to get some fertilizer and begin to fertilize your plants. Spring and summer is when most plants tend to grow a little bit quicker and wanting a little bit more food and a little bit more nourishment. So it's a good time to begin to feed your plants with some fertilizer. In terms of like the soil, it just depends on what type of plant you have or you're looking to purchase or to repot. Something, for example, if we look at the Zzz Plant, so the Zzz Plant, as we mentioned at the beginning of this workshop, requires low watering and doesn't want to be moist. It wants to be kept on the very dry side. So when you repot this plant, you want to be using a very well draining sort of potting mix. So you probably want to be using a good mixture of premium potting mix with some orchid bark as well. Orchid bark's sort of like nice, well draining, bigger chunky sort of pieces. So a good mixture of potting mix with orchid bark and also perlite as well. So perlite is a great form to use, because the perlite increases the drainage, increases the air irrigation through the plant, so it allows the plant to breathe and allows the plant to dry out a little quicker. Okay, so depending on the watering requirements of the plant, then that's how you would decide in terms of what kind of potting mix to use. So your low water maintenance plants will want a better draining type soil, and then some of your other plants, like for example your Tilansias, they're plants that like a bit of moisture, like a bit of humidity. They don't mind a little bit more water as well. So therefore, with some of your Calathea foliage sort of plants, so I've got some there, and got some. Yeah, they've got a nice little Calathea here as well. Okay, so these ones they like a little bit more water, a little bit more humidity and moisture. So those ones you can use, a little denser sort of soil. So, but having said that, I wouldn't use anything too dense. They still want a bit of drainage, but I think a good general potting mix mixed with a bit of perlite, the Calatheas should enjoy that. So yeah, but I wouldn't be putting like any orchid bark, for example, in a Calathea potting mix. Yeah.
Thank you. And I did have one question earlier on. Your Monsteras, some of them actually have aerial roots. What do you do with the aerial roots? I noticed Mel's got one behind, and I think you've got aerial roots on yours, Mel. What do you suggest we do with them?
Look, you can, if you don't like the appearance of the aerial roots, they do grow those aerial roots, and like out in nature they use those aerial roots to sort of like grow and cling onto things and help them sort of climb, you know, gain a little bit extra sort of moisture from their environment. So that's the reason why they're there and why they grow. But in terms of like indoor plant, indoor Monstera, you know, if the aerial roots gets too long, and because I've got one at home that's got a really long aerial root, you know, and you know, yeah, I personally don't mind the aerial roots, you know, like adds a little bit to the character of the plant. But if it is getting a little bit out of hand and a little bit intrusive, you can just trim them back and cut them back, and it won't impact on the plant at all. So it'll continue to grow, and you know, as long as you've got the right lighting for the plant, the right watering, feeding the plant some plant food, fertilizer over spring and summer, then it still should continue to grow and do well. Okay, so but you can cut those aerial roots off.
Thanks, Zoran.
I actually got the plant behind me from my sister-in-law when she banished it after the aerial root started digging into her carpet. So just be careful letting them get into your carpet. David, you had a very specific question on indoor bird of paradise. Did you want to jump on and ask, or would you like me to ask for you? David, I'll ask for you. His bird of paradise has white dots on the leaves. I can rub them off, but they come back. Do you know what they are, and how can I get rid of them for good?
White dots. Yeah. White dots is probably an indicator that the plant may have some bugs on there. There's a particular bug called a mealybug. So they're small and white, and you know, and they can sort of like impact on your plant, and they can produce quite quickly on your plant as well. The birds of paradise, you know, they are susceptible to those little white dots and those little white mealybugs. So if your plant does have those on them at the moment, what I'd recommend, similar to as I showed you with the peace lily, you know, the birds of paradise got those nice wide foliage to the plants. So I would begin to probably use a bit of neem oil. Okay, neem oil just to wipe down the foliage of the birds of paradise, wipe off those mealybugs. You can just wipe down the large leaves. You can also just sort of like wipe down the stems as well. So I would treat your plant with some neem oil. Again, treat it a couple of times. You give it a good wipe down 1 week. Maybe again position in a lower light area for a day or so, and then retreat it the following week, and then you'll find that those mealybugs will be removed, and then your plant won't be drained of some of that energy that the mealybugs are drawing from it and sucking out of the plant, and the plant will recover, and then it should grow nicely as well. But for those white little spots, they're generally a good sign that the plant may have those bugs called mealybugs. Yeah.
Thank you. Anna, you had a couple of questions. Did you want to jump on?
Yeah, cool. First of all, thanks for a wonderful presentation, and to your camera person as well. Thank you. They've done a great job.
Thank you. You're welcome.
You've mentioned filtered light a number of times. Could you give me a wider description on what you mean by that?
Yeah, okay. So filtered light, so if you think of direct light would be sort of like the sun sort of shining in onto your plants with nothing sort of like blocking that light. There's no sort of like no curtain or no drape or no Venetian blinds or anything like that, or there's no sort of like you might have a cover over your window or like a pergola sort of area. Okay, so direct light would be, you know, like none of those. The plant just gets that direct light from the sun. Okay, and then obviously a lot of indoor plants won't enjoy that direct light because it'd be a bit too harsh for it, and then your plants will dry off and will begin to burn, and you will begin to have those dry yellow sort of leaves. Okay, so filtered light is sort of like nice light that comes in, but it's filtered with one of those, you know, like you've got a sheer curtain or you've got a little covering, or there's a bit of filtered light in your home because the next house next door is blocking some of that light, and so you get some nice little filtered light coming through to your room. Okay, a good way to see that you're getting some filtered light is if you put your hand sort of like you know, on the wall or in the space near it. Okay, and you see like a nice sort of shadow. Okay, so generally, like the bigger the shadow or the darker the shadow, is that you're getting, you know, a bit more light in there. But if that shadow is sort of like a little bit fainter or smaller and that, then you're getting, you know, lower sort of filtered light in there as well. Okay, yep. So yeah, so that's what I mean by filtered light. Filtered by one of those sort of one of those kind of mechanisms, and it's not getting direct light direct from the sun without any of that sort of blocking it in any way.
That's really helpful. I had another question on fertilizing your plants. Yes. So I've got a worm farm, so I wondered about the use of worm castings or worm tea, or even using home compost, which we have a lot of as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, look, that would be great fertilizers. You know, like anything natural like that, the worm castings and, you know, the compost, they would make great fertilizers, nice, great natural sort of fertilizer as well. You know, and yeah, I used to work in an office environment many years ago, and we had a little worm farm in that office environment, and the worm juice or worm castings were a sought after product. You know, with a lot of the plant collectors in the office. You know, so if you do have access to that, that's great. Yeah, I would use that on a regular basis. Yeah, and your plants would really enjoy that, and they grow really well with that. So. Yes, so some of those more natural sort of products, they're great natural fertilizers.
Great, thank you.
We've got 2 more questions we might try and get through, if that's all right, Zoran. Michelle had one about trailing plants that are attached to walls, and how can you water them if you can't take them outside? Okay, yeah, so with some of the hanging plants, okay, so I've got a nice sort of heartleaf philodendron here. That's a nice little mature plant, and it's sort of trailing sort of nicely. But often when you've got the hanging plants, they're high up on a shelf, or they're hanging, and you know you haven't got, you know, good or easy access to the plant. So therefore, you know, watering becomes, you know, a little bit of an issue. So when you position your plants, obviously you want to position where we do have some access to them. You could get a watering can that's got like a longer sort of nozzle, for example, that will help with, yeah, so for example, you know, if you've got like a watering can that's got like a nice nozzle, like you can get up a little bit higher and sort of like water your plants, or you can actually get some that got even longer ones. Another option to do with like hanging plants is we have some self-watering hanging pots. Okay, so I've got I've got an example just here in the window. Okay, I've got a nice Transcanthia tricolor in that. So that's a lightweight self-watering pot. Okay, so with the self-watering pot, it's a way of, you know, hanging your plant. Looks really nice, a nice little feature, but you probably have to, the water requirement's less often because it's a self-watering pot. So when you give it a water, the water will drain out of the tray that it sits on top. Okay, and then it'll drain and down into the bottom of the hanging pot. Then it's got like a mechanism where it draws up that water. Okay, and then constantly sort of like has a constant sort of flow of water back into the pot, back into the soil. So therefore, you know, rather than watering your plant once a week, you could probably water it every 2 to 3 weeks if you've got a nice sort of self-watering sort of system as well. Okay, so that's another option with some of the hanging plants and trailing plants. You know, think about or consider a self-watering sort of mechanism or hanging pot that will make that sort of process a little bit easier as well. Thank you. Nadia, you've got a question if you wanted to come on, and I love this question because I killed 2 of these myself until I finally worked out my perfect position in my house. Nadia, are you there?
Yes, I am. So I think my question's pretty self-explanatory, but I was just asking about maidenhair ferns, okay. And is there a way not to kill them I have varying lifespans and I don't seem to change anything, and then suddenly they just start dying. So
Yeah.
I'd love to know.
Maidenhead ferns, you know, ferns in general like more water. They like a lot of water, so they enjoy being watered a bit more regularly. You know, maidenhead ferns also enjoy, you know, a brighter location as well. So, so if you know, if you can position your fern in a nice bright location, and then also give it sort of like a, like a nice sort of regular water as well. You know, so ferns generally like, a bit more water than lots of other plants. The thing with maidenhair ferns as well, we don't tend to keep a lot of ferns in store because the foliage of the fern is quite dense and like there's lots of foliage there, and the ferns can be susceptible to some insects as well. Okay, and because of their sort of like their foliage, their dense foliage, it's a bit hard to spot or find out that there's any insects on those plants. And then once it has got a few bugs, then the plant tends to lose a bit of energy and then may go south and not do as well. And as I said, for that reason, that's why we don't keep too many ferns in the store, because we're obviously concerned about pests in the store, ferns tend to have a little bit more than other plants, so we tend not to stock those type of ferns in store that often. So
Great.
Just generally, like give it a little bit more light if you can, give it a bit more water, and just have a close look at the plant, see if it has got any insects in there as well, which may impact on the plant.
Sure, I've never noticed the insects, but I'll look harder, and I think maybe a couple of missed waters, and then it just seems to just.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like because they enjoy regular water, it's a plant that if you do miss a water, then they can go down, or they can not do as well relatively quickly. So
yeah,
their foliage is quite fine. So with those maidenhair ferns, their foliage is quite fine, and there's a lot of foliage as well. So they will want a good water and a good regular water, and they generally like a good water on time as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, the maidenhair has definitely been one of my most troublesome indoor plants as well. Well, look, that's the end of the questions in there, and we're a little bit over time as well. So thank you very much for your time tonight, Zoran, and your colleague behind the camera as well has done an absolutely amazing job. So thank you. Before we go, I just want to quickly let people know about some upcoming events. We've got 2 more online events in 2020, which is terrifying to think we're coming close to the end of the year. So in a couple of weeks, on Thursday, the 19th of November, we've got kitchen garden remedies. So what can you grow in your garden and then make to help you with some of those natural medicines? So that's on Thursday, 19th of November at 6:15, and it's available on our website to book into. And then our December event on Wednesday, the 9th of December, is a zero waste family in 30 days. So author Anita Van Dyke, who's the author of A Zero Waste Life in 30 Days, is releasing her new book in December. And so she's going to be coming to talk about her best zero waste tips. So there are our next 2 events coming up, both available on the website to book into. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Zoran, and your team there. I have 9 of your top 10. So I am looking forward to coming in and getting a Stylus, because it's the only one I'm missing at the moment. So I think I need to add to my collection. So thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We might see you back in the library next week. Otherwise, we'll see you back online.
All right. See you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Melissa, what date was the one